Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue our study of the book of Judges. Yesterday we learned of our first judge, Othniel ben Kenaz, and how he saved the people from the king Kushan Rishatayim of Aram. Now today we move on to the next story. Othniel ruled for 40 years and passed on. And then in verse 12, after he passed on, in the pattern which is going to continue to repeat itself, of Vayosifu b'nei Yisrael asos hara be'enei Adonai, the people of Israel continued to do bad in the eyes of God. Vayichazek Adonai et Eglon melech Moab al Yisrael. And now a new enemy rose, a king by the name of Eglon, who was the king of Moab, the Moabites, and he ruled over the people of Israel. And the reason why he was able to rule over them is because because they were doing bad in the eyes of God. And then this king Eglon had got himself some allies to oppress the people of Israel. Vayesof Elav et Bnei Ammon, the Ammonites gathered together with him, Va'amalek, and the Amalekites. Vayelech vayaches Yisrael, and they went and they struck down the people of Israel. Vayirshu et Ir HaTimarim, and they occupied the city of palms. Generally, the city of palms is identified with Jericho, which had been conquered it was the first town conquered by the Israelites in the famous story we read about in Joshua, but now it was reconquered by Israel's enemies. Vayavdu b'nei Yisrael et Eglon melech Moab shmona esrei shana. And for 18 years, the people of Israel were subservient to the king Eglon, the king of Moab, of the Moabites. Vayizaku b'nei Yisrael al Adonai. Of course, when they were suffering, that's when they turned to cry to God. So now, Vayakam Adonai Lohem Moshiach, God established for them someone to save them, a Moshiach. A Moshiach is quite a title, someone who brings about salvation, saves the people from those that are suffering. And this time his name was Ehud ben Gera ben Hayamini. His name was Ehud, the son of Gera, who was a Benjaminite. He was from the tribe of Benjamin. He was an Iter Yad Yamino. He was a person whose right hand was on the other side, meaning he was the left-handed man. Why is this important? We'll understand as we read through the story. It's not just, it would seem like a pretty minor detail, but it's not so minor as we read through this. So, he was a left-handed man. Vayishlechu v'nei Yisrael biyado mincha, and the people of Israel in order to try to save themselves from the suffering under the king Eglon, they sent an offering, a gift, to the king Eglon, maybe a bribe, Melech Moab, the king of Moab, maybe to try to get him to relieve them of some of the tax burden or that he was burdening them with. So Vayaslo Ehud Cherev, and Ehud had a different plan. He wasn't going to just bring an offering to him, but rather he had a plan and an idea, which was as follows. He made a sword which had two edges. Gomed Arka, it was a Gomed long, which is presumably small enough to hide, but large enough to do the damage he wanted it to do. Vayachgor osa mitachat limadov, and he girded that belt underneath his clothing. In other words, it was hidden. Al yerech yamino, and he did it on his right thigh. So remember, because he was a lefty, one would expect him to put his weapon on his left side so he can draw it quickly. But he hid his weapon on his right side where people would not expect it to be. Vayakrev et hamincha le'Eglon melech Moab, and he brought this offering, this gift, to Eglon, the king of Moab. The Eglon ish bari ma'od, and Eglon was literally this means a very healthy man, which means in our terms he was obese. He was quite, and ma'od, very. So this king was an extremely large, obese individual, and again we'll see why that's important. When he completed the presentation of the gift to the king, Vayishalach et ha'am nosei hamincha. And Ehud asked his people to leave, those that were carrying the gift. This is important. So now Eglon is alone. He's alone and he's vulnerable. Again, making him less suspicious. If someone was intended to do harm to the king, you would expect him to keep his guys next to him, with him, for defense, but he asked them to go. So again, he's looking very innocent. V'hushav min ha'pesilim asher et ha'gilgal. And he went with the people of the nation. He sent them back, and then he himself turned back around. In other words, they brought this. Let's get this straight. They brought this offering to the king and the whole thing, and made it as if they're, with all these peaceful intentions. He did not visibly have any weapons or arms with him. After the presentation of the gift, they left. He tells his people, his entourage, to go. And likely the entourage did not know exactly what Ehud had in mind. And then Ehud himself comes back from the place called Pesilim, which is near Gilgal. Gilgal is a famous place where the Israelites had encamped in the time of Joshua. Vayomer, and he said to the king, Devar seiser li elecha melech. I have a secret, an important secret to tell you, sir. In other words, I have a message for you. So he created a situation where they think he's there for peaceful reasons. He just gave the king a gift, and also whatever pomp and circumstance were involved in giving the gift. He doesn't have his helpers, his soldiers, his entourage with him, so he's alone and vulnerable, and does not appear to be a threat. They don't see any weapons on him. So the Vayomer Has, the king says, quiet. And all of those that were with him left. Presumably, he must have intimated that this secret was important. Maybe to say that some of your supposed allies. Remember, we mentioned before that this Eglon, king of Moab, had these allies, the Amalekites and the Ammonites. Maybe he wanted to tell him that those guys are plotting against him or something like that. So Ehud bought Elav, and then Ehud came on his own, alone, to the king. And the king was in the cool upper chamber. Apparently, there must have been a breezy upper chamber where he went to escape the summer heat. Asher lo levado, which the king has on his own. So he had his own, upper floor, which was cool, and that's where the king was. Vayomer Ehud, and Ehud said, Devar Elohim li elecha, I have a message for you from God. Vayokam me'al hakisei, and the king gets up from his throne. Well, he's bringing me a message from God that's as important. The king stands up. Vayishlach Ehud et yad semolo. Ehud then puts out his left hand, because remember, his left hand is his strong hand. Vayikach et acherev me'al yerech yamino. The king thinks his left hand is safe, so the king doesn't do any action or scream or anything, because he sees no weapon on his left side. But he reaches over to his right side where he had a weapon hidden. He pulls it from his thigh, vayitkoel bevitno, and immediately and quickly plunges it into the belly of the king. Vayavo gam hanitzov achar halahav, and it's a pretty graphic description of a very morbidly obese man, and the fat flowed over the blade of the knife. Vayiskor hachelev bi'ad alahav, and the fat closed over it, so he was so fat that the entire knife was engulfed within his belly. And remember, it was a two-headed blade, because he wanted to do as much damage as he could. Kilo shalaf acherev mi bitno. He didn't pull it out of his belly, but he just left it in there. Until his guts started to pour out. I apologize for the gore involved, but this is how it's described in the verse. Vayetze Ehud, and the image of him being so morbidly obese is also, it's important for the story. That he was the oppressor, and he was fat. He was oppressing the people that were obviously, imagine that they were thin and they were suffering, and also the idea that he did not have a lot of mobility, so he couldn't really defend himself or say anything, which made it all the more easier for Ehud to assassinate him. Vayetze Ehud hamasterona. Ehud went out into the chambers that are outside the king's inner chambers. I can call it a vestibule. Vayiskar dal toto aliyah ba'ado, and he closed the doors behind him. So again, to delay people from discovering what he did. V'no'al, and then he locked them again to give him more escape time. V'hu yatzah, and then Ehud had left. He had left the palace and he was running back home, obviously, as fast as he could. V'avadav ba'u, and then eventually the servants of the king came. Vayiru, and they saw v'hinei daltot ha'aliyah nu'ulot. They saw that they were locked. Vayomru, and they figured, they knew that he was a very corpulent man, and that he was, he liked physical pleasures. So he must be Vayomru ach mesechu et raglav. He must be washing his legs v'cheder hamakera, in his cool room. He must be cooling off, bathing, and he would do this often enough in private, so that Ehud was able to take advantage of that. Vayachilu ad bush, and they waited a while. And eventually he never opened up the doors, he never showed up. So then, and of course it would be improper for them to unlock the door and barge in, but eventually they had no choice. They got the keys to the room, and they opened the door. And their master, their king, was fallen dead on the floor. So this had given Ehud time to escape. Verse 26, Ehud nimlat ad hit mamahum, right? Ehud had escaped during all this time while they had delayed, right? Hit mamea is to delay. It's kind of onomatopoeia, as they say, where the word almost sounds like hit mahamea, right? Like it's a repetitive word that's just, stuttering, schlepping around. While they were wasting time thinking that their king was bathing, Ehud was running. Vu'avarat ha'psilim, and he had already passed the place of Pisilim, which clearly brought him closer to home territory, closer to safe territory. Vayimalet ha'seirata, and he escaped all the way to Seira. Vayihi b'vo'o, and it was when he arrived back home, Vayitkaba shofar b'har Ephraim, and they blew out with the shofar on a message of triumph from the mountains of Ephraim. Remember, he was a Benjaminite, but the Ephraim tribe was a primary tribe. The Ephraim and Yehuda were the two main tribes and the leaders' tribes, and Har Ephraim was a place of leadership. And then, after he had assassinated their king, the people of Israel came down with him from the mountain of Ephraim, and he led them. And he said to them, Ridfu acharai, chase after me. In other words, follow me. God has placed your enemy at Moab, the people of Moab, b'yedchem, in your hands. And they went down the mountain and followed him. And they captured the fords, the crossings of the Jordan River, which crossed from the west bank of the Jordan to the east bank where Moab was. And they did not allow anyone to pass. So in other words, they took control of the borders, and they got rid of the people that used to rule over them. And eventually they led to battle where they struck down the Moabites. They killed 10,000 soldiers. Kol Shomein, these were all big, fat men. V'chol ish chayil, and all of these men of strength and power. V'lonim, not ish, not a single one had escaped. V'tikana Moab bayomahu, and the people of Moab were subdued in those days, Tachat Yad Yisrael, under the people of Israel. V'tishko ta'aretz shmonim shana, and the peace that was gained by Ehud lasted for 80 years. So this was the story of Ehud, the second of the leaders of Israel in this period of judges. So we have now learned about Othniel. We have learned about Ehud, and there's a single verse of another one, which we'll read it because it'll conclude chapter 3. V'acharov, and after that 80-year period of peace that was secured by Ehud, it didn't necessarily say that Ehud lived for 80 years, but the peace that he secured lasted for 80 years, and he was the judge of Israel for a period of time. And all we know about Ehud is the story that we just learned. We knew that he was a clever assassin, he was a solid military leader, and he was called a Moshiach, a savior, so presumably he was a righteous person. But that's all we know. Shamgar, we don't have any other biographical detail, but the next judge we're about to read, we have even less. V'acharav, and after him came Shamgar ben Anot, was Shamgar the son of Anot. Now, notably here, it does not tell us which tribe he came from. There are theories that he was from the tribe of Simon. A book that by the Koren Press in the Maggid series of Tanakh by Michael Hatton has a pretty good argument for why he believes that Shamgar was from the tribe of Simon, of Shimon, but the pasuk doesn't tell us. The verse doesn't tell us which tribe he was from. Vayachet Plishtim, and he struck down the Philistines, 600 men, b'malmad habakar, and how did he do it? He did it with his ox goad. Malmad habakar is basically a pole that while they were plowing their fields, they would go poke the cows to encourage them the oxen to encourage them to move stronger, faster, and that was what he used as his weapon. So it's trying to give us an impression how he was so powerful that with simply using his tools of farming tools, he was able to strike down 600 Philistines. This is a little bit of a reminder of a much longer story we're going to read later, the story of Shimshon, of Samson. But basically, this Shamgar was a judge who was so great, such a powerful warrior, that he was able to strike down the Philistines with his ox goad. Vayosha gamhu es Yisrael, and he also saved the Israelites from presumably a Philistine oppressor. And this is all we know about Shamgar. We know we know what his weapon was, and we know who his enemy was, and that he was a savior. Vayosha, he saved Israel, which is no small feat and no small compliment. So we now have learned the stories of three: of Othniel ben Kenaz, of Ehud ben Gera, and Shamgar ben Anot. Those three judges, and this concludes chapter 3. Thank you for studying chapter 3 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 4 and the rest of this wonderful book of Judges together.